Only idiots argue for minimum wage increases. That might sound a little harsh, but hear me out. I think there are quite a few common sense reasons why raising the minimum wage does nothing but end up leading to negative outcomes. I'm not just here to spout doom and gloom. What good is tearing something down without giving alternatives to actually solve the problem? With that said, I will explore my own ideas about the causes of the problem and how we might solve them. So, what is the problem? Raising the minimum wage has a couple of problems. The first major one is that it puts a hard number to the minimum earning potential, and this is an issue for a few reasons. Now, I'm not the smartest person in the world, and the problem is there are more intelligent people than me who have more control over the things that you require to live than I do. When these people know exactly how much you make, they can raise or lower prices in accordance with the wage they know you are making. When wages are variable, they cannot charge an exact amount. They'll still be able to change their pricing due to supply and demand pressures, but the market will not be able to know your exact rate of pay. Imagine you're a minimum wage worker and your rent is 50% of your paycheck. Even if you get a raise in minimum wage, your renter will still know exactly how much money you are making and still be able to peg your rent to 50% of your paycheck. And if you think this is going to happen for only rent, you're sorely mistaken. Gas, groceries, vehicles, anything that is an essential good will undoubtedly raise a proportionate amount with any minimum wage increases. If COVID has taught us anything, it is that companies are more than willing to test just how far they can push the average American and where their breaking point is. This is mostly possible because the US government refuses to actually impose anti-monopoly laws and has allowed unprecedented consolidation in almost every industry. Even worse than the stagflation these minimum wage workers would experience, unless the middle class gets proportionate raises, which seems extremely unlikely given today's climate, they will actually suffer the worst outcomes, receiving all of the negatives of these rising tides, which will not raise their boats, further hollowing out the middle class. Do you think this will affect top earners? No. CEO pay will continue to spike as it has been, raising 30% from 2019 to 2021. And with the rise of AI, this trend will only continue as CEOs can look to replace their workforce and siphon more money to top leadership. And this proportional inflation is a problem for many additional reasons. With a greater minimum wage, it becomes increasingly challenging for new businesses to open. As companies must compensate with higher and higher wages for workers, it becomes harder for new companies to offer competitive pricing to try and disrupt established markets. So, what will companies do to stay competitive? Unfortunately, nothing good for US based workers. Having worked at multiple companies that are global in scale and coverage, I like to think I have a pretty good understanding of the global market. Why is this bad for the US market? With the constant inflation from raises in pay and company greed, salaries from the US based labor have vastly outpaced the rest of the world. Although there hasn't been a ton of it to date, in my opinion, countries like India, Thailand, and others have skilled enough labor to replace low to middle class workers at a quarter of the pay or less. This means it would be next to impossible for younger workers entering the workforce to find jobs at large organizations. And that's not the only negative aspect the global disparity in wages creates. This is probably a controversial take, but the massive gap is also a large aspect in driving illegal immigration. Just to underscore how much higher the minimum wage is in the US versus other countries, in Mexico, the minimum wage is equivalent to $243.78. Even taking into account the federal minimum wage of $7.25, which in 31 states is actually higher than that, means that the weekly pay would come out to be $290, meaning that the monthly pay for someone in the US over Mexico would be approximately 4 times that rate of pay. It's not to single out Mexico. Many immigrants also come from China, India, the Philippines, El Salvador, among many other countries. Going back to the worker displacement point, globalization is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to US employees being replaced. The real looming threat is the emergence of AI. As AI becomes cheaper and workers become more expensive, it becomes a no-brainer to replace as much of your workforce as possible with AI. Various industries have already run up against this problem, and you don't have to look far. The Screen Actors Guild, fully automated fast food restaurants, call centers, these are only a few examples of very real disruptions that have already occurred. And there are very lucrative jobs that were once thought to be out of reach, but are now critically endangered. If you're a hospital or a tech company, would you prefer to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for a single salary, or simply replace them with an AI that performs better than any living doctor or software developer, respectively? Now multiply that times the amount of staff and salary that one of these systems could replace, and the choice becomes a no-brainer. That will be enacted as soon as feasible. So what can be done? There are quite a few solutions to this problem, some more radical than others. However, the simplest and most effective that I could think of would be to tie total executive compensation to a multiple of the lowest earning employee, and do not let companies contract out any part of their business. When that happens, there is no reason for companies to continually raise prices to drive additional profits. Another benefit is that all salaries will be tied. So the more successful the company does, the more money everyone would make. This would help motivate employees to work harder because their effort would actually impact their compensation. So what is the rate that sounds fair to you? 50 times? 100 times? 200 times? Let's say the lowest paid employee is making the current federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. Even at 200 times compensation, the top earners would still be making over $3 million a year. Sounds more than fair, right? Well, right now, CEOs make an average of 399 times the average worker's pay, which means they make even more than that over the lowest wage employee. In fact, to the tune of over 880 times minimum wage. This may not be the best solution, but it seems like one which would be most practical and the easiest to implement. Unfortunately, I think we're well past the point where we can actually trust large institutions to do the right thing. And I hope it's apparent by now that raising the minimum wage not only is useless, but actually is potentially harmful for the US. Regardless of what you think of my solution, hopefully something can be done to solve the minimum wage problem and provide a better tomorrow, because income disparity has never been worse.